Nidus, Angela Henson from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Kate Toth from Bricks and Mortar Judson Memorial Church, Reverend John Dinero from St. Anne's and Holy Trinity. John, could you come forward, John? Reverend Stefford Stallard from Mosaic Baptist Church in Crown Heights. Could you come forward, Steph? Reverend Gwen Dinkle from the Pentecostal House of Prayer in Bed-Stuy. Come forward. Mark Appel and Rabbi Abe Friedman from Borough. So we would like to begin. Good morning. My name is Pastor Gilman Rose. I'm the Director of Faith-Based and Clergy Initiative for the Brooklyn Borough President. And thank you all for coming here. I'd like now to introduce to you the Brooklyn Borough President, Eric L. Adams.
Thank you, Pastor Monrose, and I want to thank our faith leaders who came out to really join us in this conversation, my elected officials, and as well as our partner, our district attorney, who has been extremely clear on pursuing actions against those who participate in hate crimes. And our partners in this initiative, Jonathan Greenblatt from the ADL, the CEO of the ADL, and my good friend, I consider to be a brother in this pursuit, Evan Bernstein. Evan and I have met on several occasions and talked about this from my start of being here as the borough president. This is a real issue, and we are not going to solve the increase in hate in general, and in particular, the increase in hate crimes against Jewish New Yorkers and Jewish Brooklynites. And we can't just ignore it and act like it's not happening, because it is. And that is why we're going to take a series of steps. This is one of many steps that we're going to take to meet this head on. This fight must be met with a head-on mindset of addressing this problem. Brooklyn is a garden of diversity, and the weeds of hate, they have infiltrated this garden, and we can't just prune it away. We have to go to the core and to the seed where it lies to ensure that it won't continue to grow and continue to destroy and choke away all of the healthy flowers of diversity that we have in this borough. 47% of Brooklynites speak a language other than English at home. We have one of the largest Jewish populations outside of Israel. We consider ourselves to be the Tel Aviv of America, and if we can't deal with hate crime of Jewish constituents here in Brooklyn, then it's not going to be dealt correctly throughout this entire country. It starts here, it ends here, and how we handle it here will send the right message throughout the entire country. 52% of the crimes of hate crimes were targeted against Jews. 52% were targeted against Jews. And when you look at the numbers, they speak for themselves. When you look at an audit of anti-Semitic incidents study in 2017, it revealed that there was more than 200 reported anti-Semitic incidents in New York City. This is a 90% jump from 2016. From 2017 to 2016, there was a 90% jump in incidents. In 2018, 13 out of the 17 reported anti-Semitic assaults happened in Brooklyn. 13 out of the 17. This is becoming ground zero because of our Jewish population in this borough. People who prey on Jewish constituents have decided to come to the place where they pray. In Borough Park, Crown Heights, Williamsburg, we see some of the actions that are caught on videotapes of breaking windows, striking individuals, throwing rocks and stones. We're just seeing a repeated increase on this incident. And this is against the backdrop of what the ADL is ramping up and doing, as will be talked about a little later, but they have been the modern day Paul Revere of telling us that this hatred is coming, and for the most part, many in and out of government have ignored the cries that we have been hearing in the synagogues and in our communities throughout this entire city, and that is why we want to ramp up our actions to state that it will not continue to happen. I'm calling an emergency meeting with my superintendents here in Brooklyn, Brooklyn North and Brooklyn South, part of the Department of Education and our charter schools, because we want to go into our schools and teach our students the conversation around diversity, around bullying, around the anti-Semitic actions, around the actions around attacks against LGBTQ communities, attacks against our Muslim communities, of the young women who wear hijabs that are attacked and assaulted, attacks against other students because of everything from homelessness. There has been such an increase in hatred and attacks. And I believe that the Jewish communities in the areas of Williamsburg and Greenpoint and in Crown Heights, because of their religious garb, they are able to be pointed out, as we see Rabbi Eli Cohen, and they are targeted because they become a symbol of the Jewish community here in the borough of Brooklyn, and they're easily identifiable, and people with hate in their heart are specifically targeting this population because it's almost they know that here is a person of Jewish faith, and they are using their hatred towards this particular group. Brooklyn happens to have the large number of members from the Hasidic community, and they are being targeted repeatedly. And we say that must stop, and we're going to do all that we have to do to stop that. The uptick in hate crimes in this borough is a blemish on this entire city and this entire country, and it's a blemish that we're not going to live with. And I'm saying to the men and women of the police department, we cannot ignore the crimes. We have to report them the way they are. If it's a hate crime, we have to report it. We can't sugarcoat it. We can't try to downgrade it. We have an excellent bureau within the police department, the Hate Crime Bureau, and I'm going to state that the only way we can properly identify and correct this is to properly classify it. I know there's a tendency to want the numbers not to be as high as they're supposed to be, but we cannot live in a cosmetic universe that we are living in a unified fashion. We must report them the way they are and then devise effective solutions to correct them. And so my hope today, to partner with the ADL and other organizations to come up with a clear direction of educating our children to understand the power of tolerance and how we live together. We must stop the increase in hate crimes in general, and specifically the increase among the Jewish people of this city. And we can't remain silent. We have been too silent around these issues, and we've all seen them. We've all have witnessed the attacks. We've all witnessed the breaking of windows in synagogues. We have all witnessed the writing of swastikas, the comments, the anti-Jewish comments on the subway stations, on buildings, on cars, on vehicles. We've all witnessed this. And we cannot remain silent. We saw what silence has done in the past. We cannot allow a repeat of that in the future, specifically here in Brooklyn and also in New York City. New York City must have a zero tolerance for hate, and that's why we're here today. And so, again, I want to thank all of our religious leaders and elected officials that are here today to talk about this issue. And I want to turn it over to our partner in this pursuit, Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the ADL. Jonathan?
So I just want to start by thanking Borough President Adams for that incredibly powerful set of remarks. His commitment on this issue is unambiguous and powerful. I also want to thank Pastor Monrose, his faith advisor, Evan Bernstein, who manages the ADL region, New York, New Jersey, and all the faith leaders who are with us today. There is no single place in America with a richer Jewish culture than Brooklyn. That culture stretches back far in time. The first Jew to settle in Brooklyn purchased land here in the mid-17th century. It's a culture that nurtures greatness. Sandy Koufax, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, even Larry David are among some of the notable Jews who grew up right here in Brooklyn. And it's a culture that leaves its mark on all of America. You can have a nosh at a Brooklyn deli in Spokane, Washington, or Birmingham, Alabama, as well as you can do it right here in Brooklyn. And part of what makes Brooklyn so special is that it boasts a Jewish population of 600,000, and that 600,000 person strong community is incredibly diverse. It includes the world's largest concentration of Syrian Jews. It includes hipsters, and it includes Hasids. And that vibrancy has flourished here because Brooklyn has been so welcoming. It has one of the most diverse populations of any borough, and I would argue any city in the world. That's why it's so troubling to see this borough plagued by this growing scourge of anti-Semitism. As Eric said, in 2017, there were over 200 reported anti-Semitic incidents here in New York City. But this represented a 90% spike. And in 2018, again, as the borough president said, 13 out of 17 anti-Semitic assaults that took place in the city happened right here in Brooklyn. And at ADL, we track these incidents. We track acts of harassment and vandalism and violence. And what's so alarming is that the situation has not improved this year. In fact, the severity of the incidents seems to be increasing in terms of their frequency, their aggressiveness, and their physicality. This year to date, there have been 111 confirmed incidents in Brooklyn alone, and another reported 6 just over the past week and a half. I mean, this is deeply alarming. Now, let's acknowledge that the Jewish community isn't the only minority that is affected by crime in Brooklyn. And violent acts take place every day where African Americans and Caribbean Americans and other groups suffer. These also demand our attention. We should not overlook this ongoing crisis. But the dramatic surge of attacks on the Jewish community really has no precedent. And I believe this is an issue that hasn't gotten enough national press attention. Maybe that's because it doesn't sort of fit neatly into a partisan narrative. Maybe that's because it isn't about the bias of one side of the political spectrum or the other. But what we are seeing are Jewish people and Jewish institutions being targeted and attacked simply because they are Jewish. And that is an outrage. ADL has called on law enforcement and elected officials to address this issue. We've offered rewards of up to $10,000 for information leading to arrests and convictions of those who've committed these anti-Semitic hate crimes in Brooklyn. And we work actively with the NYPD whenever and however possible. But to stop hate, we can't just arrest our way out of the problem. We have got to change hearts and minds. And that's why we believe it is so important to focus on children so we can inoculate the next generation from intolerance, so we can immunize them against anti-Semitism and all forms of hate. That's why I'm proud to be announcing today that in partnership with the Brooklyn Borough President, who, as I said, has been an ally for so long, in the fight against anti-Semitism, and the New York City Department of Education, ADL will be doubling the number of Brooklyn schools involved in our groundbreaking No Place for Hate program. No Place for Hate, which has helped to promote tolerance in over 1,700 public and private schools nationwide in the past 20 years, it enables a school to incorporate ADL's anti-bias and anti-bullying resources within their existing curricular program. No Place for Hate is unique because it is largely student-driven. The program asks student-led groups to identify bias and bullying issues in their school, to develop measurable goals to address those issues, and to coordinate and oversee the implementation of anti-bias and diversity activities throughout the year. No Place for Hate has already made a difference here. During the prior school year, ADL reached more than 8,200 students in 22 Brooklyn schools. That's why I'm so proud to announce that today, ADL will be making an additional investment of $250,000 for this program for the 2019-2020 school year. And that's just for starters. We have a goal of reaching as many as 40 schools in Brooklyn, with an emphasis on Borough Park, Crown Heights, and Williamsburg. Through our expanded No Place for Hate outreach, we have the potential to reach at least 10,000 more students in the borough's public schools, and also hopefully in its yeshivas and religious schools too. We will recruit from the community to find trainers to serve the communities that we seek to support. ADL sees this work as part of our core mission of fighting hate for good, and we're grateful that the New York City Council, as well as Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, have supported our efforts. So I'm also pleased, really honored, to be joined here today by so many faith and community leaders. I mean, look around. This is the mosaic that is Brooklyn, as well as elected officials, as well as other partners who are all lending their own hands to this work and agree on its importance. This alone won't stop hate. But if we can vaccinate our classrooms, if we can reach our kids, we have a chance at making progress on fighting prejudice once and for all. And together, as a community, as we collaborate, we demonstrate what it means to work toward cultivating a borough where everyone is welcome, where everyone can live and work, play, and ultimately pray without fear. That is the Brooklyn that the world knows and loves. That is the Brooklyn that we are so happy to help build with Borough President Adams, with the City Council, and with leaders all throughout our community. Once again, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and the commitment from ADL in moving this initiative forward. And again, I want to thank Evan on the local level, just has been amazing representing the organization. We want to bring on now our district attorney, Eric Gonzalez, has pursued many of these cases, and we have been in constant communication around them. And I just want to thank you personally, Eric, for doing so. DA Gonzalez.
Good morning. I want to thank the Borough President, Eric Adams, and Jonathan Greenblatt from the Anti-Defamation League, and also my friend, Evan Bernstein, for making a critical investment in our schools, in education, and against all forms of bigotry. The beauty of the ADL is that while their core mission is to protect the Jewish people and teach about anti-Semitism and prevent it, they also care deeply about all forms of bigotry, and much of their education speaks to anti-Black hate, anti-LGBTQ hate, and their work is so meaningful because it's about tolerance. And I'm grateful to the elected officials who are here today, our stakeholders in our community, and of course our clergy from Brooklyn's diverse communities for being here today. We're standing with the borough president and the ADL against all forms of hate, in particular, these rash of despicable hate crimes and anti-Semitism against our Jewish community. Brooklyn is proud to have the second largest Jewish community in the world outside of Israel. That community is a stalwart, a part of Brooklyn. When many people fled Brooklyn in the 70s and 80s, what they considered the demise of the inner city, the Jewish community invested, built businesses, yeshivas, and shuls to make sure that the community would have a place to grow. And today, when everyone wants to live in Brooklyn, there's been pushback against the Jewish community in ways that have expressed themselves in anti-Semitism. Now, I can tell you from my experience as the district attorney, vigorously investigating and prosecuting these cases, we created a hate crimes bureau, a dedicated hate crimes bureau less than a year ago to help the New York City Police Department further investigate and prosecute these cases effectively. And what we've seen is that there are three categories of offenders. There's those that have hate in their hearts and commit these despicable acts. There's many who have mental health issues and are arrested and then sent to mental health institutions. And alarmingly, and most concerningly, a lot of these crimes, especially the most recent crimes, the ones you've seen on the news, have been committed by juveniles, people under 17 years of age, 13, 14, 15, 16. It's astounding, it's heartbreaking that our young people are full of this rage and this anti-Semitism. This is why I'm standing here today supporting the borough president and the ADL for this effort to get into our schools, because those cases are not even processed in our criminal courts. Those cases are sent to our family courts. The police department will make an arrest and have to then turn over the person to their parents. So we need, and we understand that making an arrest is not sufficient, that we have to get to the core of why this is happening. I think ignorance breeds hate, so therefore education is critical to battling bigotry and anti-Semitism, especially young people. It's a lot harder to select someone, to hate them if you know them, if you learned about their culture, if you understand where they come from. We've seen a number of SWAT sticker cases in Brooklyn, numbers that we have not seen years before. Some by children who don't even know what a SWAT sticker really means. When they've been arrested, we've held them accountable. And one of the ways that we've done that is by having some of these young people visit the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. And then we had them dealing and having a tour with an actual Holocaust survivor and have conversations with other Holocaust survivors. These young people, upon learning the history of the Jewish people through the Holocaust and all that they've been through throughout history, have come back appalled and embarrassed by their behavior. Yet they didn't understand this before they etched a SWAT sticker on a park bench or at someone's property, whether it's by chalk or any other means. So I am very optimistic that with further education, further anti-bullying training, further tolerance training, we can make a difference in a lot of the lives of these young people. I've spoken to our school chancellor, I've spoken to the UFT. I'm fully behind getting into this classroom with a tolerance training. My office will help volunteer assistant district attorneys to do some of this training and teaching in the classrooms to bring people together. We will continue to bring our community together. And to any offender out there, make no mistake, if you select someone for an anti-Semitic hate crime or any other hate crime in Brooklyn, you would be vigorously prosecuted and held accountable and go to jail. I want to thank the ADL and the borough president for putting this money behind the curriculum so that we can get to more classrooms. I think that if we don't address this issue with our young people, we're going to continue to see this. If we can prevent these young people from committing these acts, we'll be safer. And my final message is, to the Jewish community, I know that there's a lot of fear. There's fear of going outside, fear that you can't get from one place to another, that it's no longer safe in Brooklyn. I assure you that working with the NYPD, my office will do everything in its power to keep Brooklyn safe and to make sure these hate crimes are stamped out. Thank you.
And I believe it's important to hear from one of the members of the Crown Heights community, Rabbi Eli Cohen, Executive Director of Crown Heights Community Center.
Thank you, Borough President, and I really want to congratulate you, and you really have a great person in charge of this in the person of Pastor Gilman Rose. He's really a great guy, has done a really wonderful job. And I also want to congratulate the ADL on this work. Jonathan, you have the best of the best in Evan Bernstein, as really not only creating activity and putting together an initiative like this, but also in educating the world about the dangers and the issue of anti-Semitism. And I know he's a great speaker and a great traveler, and really wonderful work that's being done. And I know that this project is going to be successful because I have my own experience in this area. Jeffrey Davis, a district leader in Crown Heights and a close friend, and I went into a number of public schools last year and spoke to the children. We went to elementary schools, we went to junior highs, and we went to high schools. And more recently, we sat down on the floor and read with preschoolers and read Jeffrey's new book about his interaction with the Rabbi and how he learned from the Rabbi about love yourself and love your fellow. And we saw a tremendous level of interest on the part of the young people, that they were responsive, they responded intelligently, they had wonderful questions, and we began to understand that when you, first of all, we role modeled a member of the African American community and a member of the Jewish community arm in arm, working together, and that was, I think, an important message. But also, we saw that when you break down the stereotypes and when you eliminate some of the false narrative and when you explain some of the differences in dress, in culture, in custom, that this helps a lot in bringing people together. And it was a very, very positive experience. And I'm sure that this educational experience that's being announced today will go further in that way. And there is no place for hate. And I think that's a great message and one that will be well received. And I also want to say that the response that we've had from our elected officials, we have Matthew Eugene, our council member here, and the other council members that represent Central Brooklyn, Laurie Cumbo and others, and leaders all the way up to the Attorney General of the state of New York, that whenever there has been an incident, the willingness of our elected officials to come out and make the statement that this is not who we are and not something that we can tolerate, this is appreciated. And the same is true of our clergy leaders from all across the different faiths that are represented in Brooklyn, that everyone has shown the willingness to come out and make the statement that hate is not who we're about. And last but not least, I want to say that the response from the district attorney and law enforcement and from the New York Police Department to take these cases seriously, to prosecute them appropriately, to deal with them at the root, and prevention also has been phenomenal. So it's a great response at all levels. The community is together, and I think that we will reach and change the hearts of our young people. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Through this initiative.
I want to acknowledge some of the electeds that are here, and if you want to speak with them after, many of them represent areas of Jewish population. Assembly Member Joe Lintor, Councilman Matthew Eugene, Senator Brian Kavanaugh, Councilman Brad Lander, and one of the activists in the Crown Heights area, Devorah Haberstein. And I just want to acknowledge their presence here as well. And I believe that it is so important that we build off of what the district attorney stated, that when you have people using symbols of hate without knowing the meaning of the symbols they are using, then it is clearly the actions of these young people in particular is rooted in the symptom and not the underlying cause of their behavior. They are in family and community structures that is really perpetuating some of this hate that we see. Young people don't come from their mother's womb hating Jews, hating gays, hating blacks, hating Muslims. They are learning it somewhere. And the only way we can counterbalance the education of hate that is played out on our streets is to have institutionalized reversing that hate inside our educational system. So the money we're putting in this program to educate from kindergartens to 12th graders, this seed is going to remove the seed of hate, the seed of violence. And so when you look at the ADL's book that they put out, The Good Fight, you flip through the pages and you see the uniformity of all groups experiencing some level of hate. If we ignore what is happening to Jewish residents in this city, it's only a matter of time before those rocks, those stones, those writings, those terms of hate is going to spill over to the Christians, it's going to spill over to the Muslims, it's going to spill over to the Sikhs, it's going to spill over to those who are from the LGBTQ community. We can't tolerate it anywhere. And the voices that should be speaking the loudest about anti-Semitism are those who are not Jewish. Because if we are silent, then we are placing our heads in the sand, and then it's only a matter of time before our communities are going to impact this same form of hate. Hate is hate. That is what we're attempting to stop. And that is why this initiative is important. Today is only the start of our extremely well thought out plan of addressing the issues of hate in this city. What seems to be coming from Washington, D.C. is spilling over throughout all of our states and all of our cities. New York City in general and Brooklyn in particular, we're stating is stopping here. We'll open the floor to any questions at this time.
If I could ask the Borough President and Mr. Greenblatt, does your office plan to provide funding to the ADL initiative? And also, can you say what else is in the works for fighting anti-Semitism?
Yes, we're going to also contribute money to this initiative. And the goal is, it's important to state, as the DA indicated, we can't arrest ourselves out of this problem, particularly when you have young people using symbols of hate and don't even realize what the symbols represent. The real irony here is when you look at the number of people who are participating in the crime and then the historical relationship with the Jewish community and the African American community. There's a long, rich relationship that the African American and Jewish community both have had for so many years. Jewish leaders marched with Dr. King. Jewish leaders were there in the beginning of the NAACP. There's a long, rich history. And so where we have fallen short as adults, we have not made sure that that history is handed down to our young people to know. And so we're going to contribute to this. We're going to meet with the executive superintendents here in the Borough of Brooklyn, who will meet with their superintendents to make sure that this curriculum of not allowing hate to survive here is spread throughout our educational system.
You said your office has plans for the future to fight anti-Semitism. Is there anything you can say about that now?
I'm not understanding the question.
Okay,
our office did not start doing this. We have a program here in Brooklyn every year that I've been in office called and celebrating our diversity International Day of Friendship, where we called in different groups to come here as well. We've been holding with our faith-based leader here in Borough Hall, meetings with all of our faith-based institutions, including the Jewish community. Our $1 million contribution to the Jewish Children Museum. So there's a history in Borough Hall, as long as I've been here, to put financial support behind the conversation and bring people into the conversation, and we're going to continue that. Jonathan?
Yep.
Mr. Greenblatt, if I could ask this.
Sure.
The educational program launched last year. Can you say how old the students are who are involved? How'd you come up with the curriculum? Is it ADL staff who go into schools, that kind of thing?
Yes, so ADL runs No Place for Hate all over the country. The program's been around for decades. The program has achieved proven results in different schools where it's been introduced. And what we'll do is we'll bring in trainers who will again work with the students, because ultimately we believe in a peer leadership model that allows the students to mentor and coach younger students. So high school students will work with middle school students. Middle school students will work with elementary school students to teach them about the peril of prejudice, what it means. And it focuses on all forms of difference, though you better believe what we're going to launch here in Brooklyn is going to be very targeted on the issue of anti-Semitism, which has become so rampant. I would just say we're able to do this again because of support from the borough president. The New York City Council has also been supportive of this and given a grant, and we're committing our own resources to make this count, because ultimately, as you know, the borough president said, it may start with the Jews. It never ends with the Jews. And anti-Semitism is a harbinger of other things to come. So wrestling this to the ground, solving this problem, it needs to start right here in Borough Hall, and we have the leadership. And yet, this is why the faith communities are so important, because ultimately government alone can't tackle this. We need NGOs, faith leaders, and all people in the community locking arms to put this down.
We have two questions, one here and then the gentleman from Israel.
How many schools currently in Brooklyn have this program in their schools and are going through this curriculum, and how is it divided in terms of ages and age groups?
I couldn't give you the age off the top of my head, but we have 22 schools in Brooklyn today that represents a total population of 8,200 plus students. That's who we're reaching right now. Ben?
This is a question I think both from the borough president. Can you talk about where you're addressing the mental health aspect of this issue? And the second question for both of you, how do you feel like the city government as a whole is addressing this issue from City Hall?
I'll let the borough president speak to the mental health issues. Look, I think the mayor has been talking about this issue for some time, which is good. He appointed a new woman to run their Office of Hate Crimes, which has been important. She's actually a former ADL staffer. I would really give a lot of credit to Commissioner O'Neill, to Mark Molinari, and the NYPD, who have been so good in terms of using the tools that law enforcement has at its disposal to try to make sure that any of the perpetrators of these crimes are arrested and prosecuted. And I'd give a lot of credit to Eric as well, because, again, the DA's office has been really critical, too.
Hold on. Let me answer, because in the mental health aspect, the mental health conversation is an extremely in-depth conversation. Ever since we closed many of the facilities after a lawsuit, we moved many individuals with mental health issues to the streets without giving the wraparound services they deserve. We cannot law enforcement our way out of the mental health problems that we are facing, and it needs to be a more in-depth conversation around that. We don't know that we can't distinguish between people are acting out, displaying anti-Semitism based on their mental health problems, or they committing a crime. That's what the district attorney has to make that final analysis of. We can't do that right here on this conversation right now.
Borough President, thank you. Two questions. First, you've talked about how transformative this program is. You reached 8,200 students. It's in 22 schools. However, there is an increase still in hate crimes in Brooklyn. So do you have any data that explains the surge, the doubling of these incidents, despite the fact that it has reached so many students? And then secondly, can you address the egg throwing incidents? Because a lot of viewers may say, well, this is not serious because people are just throwing eggs. So separately, can you just explain why those incidents should be taken seriously?
Okay, so just dealing with the pieces on what you asked. With the number of students who have gone through the program, that is not a substantial number of students when you look at the overall population of the student population. And I think we need to target some of the areas where we're seeing hate crimes and when we're seeing groups live together. We want to start focusing on our Crown Heights, our Williamsburgs, our Borough Park, mostly in particular the Crown Heights and Williamsburg, where you see a large number of Jewish people and non-Jewish people living together. We want to focus on those schools. Then we want to do a cross-analysis of the law enforcement stats that are showing where the increases. Those are the schools that we really need to focus on so that we can deal with the problem is actually existing on a triage level. Let's go where the heavy numbers are first, and then let's talk to some of the young people who participated in the actions. Why did you do it? Let's start to learn how to go to the core of the problem and not just responding to the problem. So I think it's important to get in more schools because the numbers may seem like a lot, but when you look at the student population in Brooklyn, it's not a lot. I'll get the exact number to you. I don't know it offhand.
And just to build on what he said, I think it's really important. The targeting, we're focusing on Borough Park, Crown Heights, and Williamsburg. We haven't done that before, being so targeted. The other thing to say about your point about egg throwing, does it really matter? Look, you heard about it from Ellie, and I'm just going to reinforce. We are literally living in a moment. There was a recent study that showed that 9 out of 10 Jews are concerned about rising anti-Semitism. And when we're at a point where people are afraid to go pray, people are afraid to venture outside to walk to their house of worship, people are afraid to show up wearing a kippah, that's something that should be unacceptable under any circumstances, and it's intolerable here in Brooklyn. And considering the concentration of people and the fact that we're conspicuous means we need to literally solve this problem before it gets any worse. And it will get worse if we don't do something about it.
Can the DA just speak to what consequences, if any, criminally, these egg throwers would even face? If you could step to the podium, sir, please.
Well, let me just start off by saying anyone who would minimize egg throwing is a problem. This is serious. It's heartbreaking, as I said before, because the images seem to show very young children, probably 13 or 14 years old. What most people don't realize is that those cases don't come into the criminal courts. They go to family court. And it's frustrating because it goes into a black box because adjudications in family court are sealed to the public. So no one even knows what the accountability often looks like unless you're in the court when it happens. So we have to figure out that piece. But what we do know is that education has to be the primary motivating factor in our family courts, that we have to make sure that those young people who even commit something like an egg throwing are given severe consequences for it so that others would learn. I believe in the cases where I've dealt with young people before raise the age implementation, or some young people who are maybe just 18, that making them learn about the community that they harmed and trying to cause them to redress that harm. We've worked with Devorah in the past to try to get some young people to be accountable, learn what they did, and then go and teach their fellow classmates about what they've done so that they would then discourage that. Because I think what happens is the borough president is completely right, that we've lost what binds us together. The Jewish community in Brooklyn has been a stalwart part of our community, has been very integral in fights for equality. And quite frankly, there is a lot of anti-Semitism. I think a lot of it relates to the issues dealing around gentrification, right? That this thought that the community is being gentrified and people are being forced out of their communities causes young people to also be fearful. And so we need to deal with that underlying thing. There's going to be a lot of different ways we address this issue. Education is a key component. Law enforcement and prosecution is going to be important. But our community-based organizations are also very important to make sure that we reach out and we bring people together.
Hold on. Go ahead, bro.
I really want to address this point about the eggs, if you don't mind for 1 second. First of all, I just want to say that we've had numerous teeth knocked out, we've had broken limbs, bruising. We're talking about several cases over the past year or so in Crown Heights where there have been serious physical injury. So we should not in any way diminish this. Secondly, if you're a business person out in a suit and a hat, walking down the street and you get eggs thrown at you, it's not two kids throwing eggs at each other on Halloween. This is talking about a few days after, and now your clothing is covered with egg. You have to go now, change, lose your appointment. And there's a sense of intimidation that people are trying to affect by this kind of issue, of activity. So this is not something to be diminished at all. But I want to say also, though, that the Jewish community is very resilient, and we've heard a lot about fear and so on, and there is definitely a sense of concern, but I don't put it to the level of fear of people going out. We just had this last Sunday, I know people here from COL Live, which is a community news blog in Crown Heights, and they conducted a food day, and they went from restaurant to restaurant, 50 restaurants in Crown Heights. It's a budding place where people are visiting every day and every evening to enjoy really good food, and there's a lot of good kosher food in Crown Heights, so, and people are coming from all over the city to enjoy it. So it's not at the level yet where we're talking about fear of going outside, but it is definitely a level of concern, and it's important that we address it now before it goes further.
My question is for CEO Greenblatt. What do you think both religious and political leaders can do better in addressing these issues, not just here in the city, but also places like Hudson Valley and Rockland?
It's a good question, and I'm glad you said that because the issues are certainly not limited to Brooklyn. We've seen these issues in Hudson Valley specifically. We've seen these issues in other parts of the city. We've seen these issues in New Jersey, where again, members of the Orthodox community are targeted. They are intentionally harassed and intimidated for the purpose of marginalizing them. And whether it's rooted in ignorance or it's from intention, I don't really care. What I care about is the impact on Jewish communities, on families and individuals. That being said, you know, look, I will go back to something that the borough president said or that he alluded to. Racism isn't only his problem as an African American. It's my problem. And xenophobia isn't only a problem for those who are immigrants, or who came here as refugees. It's my problem, a person who was born here in the United States. And so I would say anti-Semitism isn't only a problem for the Jewish community. It's all of our problem. And so I think it starts when leaders lead. When they speak up and interrupt intolerance when it happens. And don't say, well, I won't say anything because that person is from my political party. Or I won't say anything because that person is not from my community. I mean, my friends, like the silence, as Dr. King said, the silence of our friends is deafening, or I'm paraphrasing, in the face of injustice. So I would say, whether you're a faith leader, whether you are a borough president or a school board president or the president of the United States, all of us have a responsibility to step up and speak out when hate happens on our watch, whether or not it affects us.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Do you think lawmakers in the Hudson Valley are doing that?
I think that we need all of our elected officials to give this issue the kind of attention and focus that Borough President Adams has done right here in Brooklyn. Yeah, I mean, look, I think, you know, there is a place, if you will, for bystanders. But stopping hate is a contact sport. We need everybody on the field. And whether you're wearing a badge or you're just a member of the community, when you see someone harassed on a street corner because he's wearing a black hat or because she's wearing a hijab, all of us as Americans, I think, have an obligation to step forward and say, not okay, not on my watch. This should be no place for it.
You mentioned that national media is not giving enough attention to this. Can you elaborate on?
Sure. I think the idea that you'd have 111 incidents, that you'd have 200 incidents here in New York City should be a national news story. It doesn't belong in the Metro section of the Times. It belongs on the front page. But you know what? Here's the thing. In the world we're in today that's so polarized and so charged and so political, everything needs to fit into a narrative. But you know what? I don't care how you vote. I care what you value. And if you value decency, and if you value diversity, and if you value dignity, you're on my team. Period, end of story. And so the flip side is when you don't value those things, when you allow hostility to happen, when you simply ignore intolerance, that is unacceptable because that's how it breeds.
Yeah, and we need to just answer your question about the national attention to it. There needs to be a national response. Mm-hmm. And that is what the ADL and I and the leaders here is, what is our national response? Because it's clear that something that may seem to be a spark should not have to turn into a blazing fire before we realize the severity of it. We want to deal with it on this level, and we want to have a response that can be duplicated nationally. At the heart of this issue is that we are seeing people who are living together not fully understanding each other, and we want to change that. Thank you very much.
And I want to just also make it clear that while Brooklyn has had the majority of these hate crimes in the city, that the underlying factors that lead to this is citywide. What's causing hate is a problem that I believe stems from our national government downward. And when we say that this has not been handled as a national story, right? There's more in Brooklyn because this is the home of the largest Jewish community in the United States. But the factors that have led to anti-Semitism is something that really needs to be pushed out on a national level, because it's not just in Brooklyn. And anyone who thinks it's just in Brooklyn is mistaken. And so that is one of the things, as the Brooklyn DA, I'm going to make sure I do my part to fight it, but we need to make sure that it's handled across our country.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you.